So I'm Rowena Barrett. I'm the head of the School of Management here at QUT. I've been in academia for far too many years. My research looks at managing people, particularly in smaller firms. I suppose when I went back to university, it became quite apparent that all the stuff that we did in our HR and industrial relations as well, which is what I was studying, was all about large firms. At the time I went to university, it was all about Japanese manufacturers and car plants. Except that in Australia, 97% of all businesses have less than 20 people in them, and most of them have less than 4. So, all the theories seem to have very little to say about what happened in small firms. There was Joe Isaacs, who is a emeritus professor at Melbourne University. He gave a guest lecture in one of my classes, and they'd done a survey on industrial relations in small firms. And I suppose for me, it made me realise I'd grown up in a small business family, I'd grown up in a family business family, that perhaps there was another side of the world that needed to be looked at. Well, the title of my thesis was Does Size Matter? And what does it mean about small firms? So there's very much a view about the management of people in small firms is all warm and fuzzy because everyone knows one another and everyone gets on well, and stuff happens and it's fantastic, and there are places for people to pursue, balance their work and family, and they're all about community and family. And frankly, that's a load of tosh. It's not actually the case in many small firms. They can be highly dictatorial. We know from the research that the founder sets a blueprint for how their HR unfolds, and once that blueprint is set, which is pretty early in the piece, it's very difficult to shift it. So the individual who runs the business has a huge amount of power over what happens within the business, and it's not all warm and fuzzy. So my research was really looking at, what actually influences the way people are managed or how they behave in smaller firms. And really, at the time I started doing my research, there was, no one talked about small firms. Many people still don't talk about small firms. The focus, if you pick up the newspaper, the Australian Financial Review, it's got some entrepreneurial war stories in it, but the majority, we're talking about bigger businesses, or we're talking about startups, but we're not talking about the human aspect of the startup. So in my research, I'm primarily qualitative. I would say that I have a bit of a sociological bent. However, I trained as a mathematician, which might be why I'd rather talk to people than use numbers. I think in answering the different questions, I'll use the numbers where I need to, and then elaborate far more with what people can tell me. So in understanding what goes on in firms, you need to talk to the owner, you need to talk to employees, you need to talk to people around the firm as well, those expert others. So I'm thinking, for example, there was a small project I did not that long ago in Western Australia, which was looking at transport companies and training in transport, because transport is hugely important in Australia. The freight task is enormous and growing, but no one wants to drive a truck. So why don't they want to drive a truck? What is it that you need in order to encourage people into driving trucks and long distance? So that was about talking to truck drivers, talking to employers, talking to industry personnel, people in the training sector as well, about what was needed, and then understanding all those other analyses that sit below the actual day-to-day practice. That piece of work was an important one for policy. So it was a piece of contract research for the training organisation in the industry. They had spent time, money, effort developing policy, building training packages. And when you got out in the industry, they could have been, blowing up balloons, really. It really hadn't had any impact. And a lot of the thing about small firms is you only know what you want to know when you need to know it. The fact that it's out there and has existed for a long time doesn't make any difference until I need it. So it was like, well, it was a bit about how can we try to shift that mindset in small firms and to get business owners thinking about their business and to think about the needs of the business. And I suppose that's always been the way that I've taken my HR research. I only want to understand it in the context of what can it do for the business. So what's the relationship between your HR practices and organisational performance? Because once we understand the business value, we can start to change the drivers inside the firm. We can think about things in different ways rather than, I had a job, oh yeah, my friend's son down the road can take that job. No, what's the needs of the business? How do we then work backwards to create a job that will fit and deliver that value for the business? Well, I think for businesses, they need to understand that people are a resource, and often in the small businesses, they are the most expensive resource. They are also the most risky resource. If you don't organise it, if you don't plan, if you don't manage that resource, well, you're going to be burning cash and you're going to be burning customers and you're not going to be creating value. So you actually have to start by thinking, how should this business be organised? What people do I need in this business? What skills do those people have to have? What are their capabilities? What are their qualities? And actively recruit for that rather than just let it happen. If it was common sense, which is what many business people will say, then this is not sense that is very common that people have.